A few weeks ago, we reviewed the new Accept album, Humanoid, and we asked the question, where does this album rank amongst the entire Accept library? Tonight, we will answer that question as we go through every Accept album and rank them from the worst to the absolute best. Where does your favorite album rank? Find out next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. Tonight, we're going to tackle Accept, their entire discography from beginning to end, and rank each album. Not only are we going to rank each album, we're going to put them in three distinct categories: love it, like it, or leave it. For as much as I love Accept, they have had kind of an uneven career, having both sensational albums and albums that are, quite frankly, forgettable. So we're going to go through all of that and give you the guide to, if you want to explore Accept, where to start your search and probably where to avoid looking too hard. Now, for those of you maybe not familiar with Accept, let me give you a brief history of the band. This is a band that started up in the late 70s and put out a string of big albums in the 80s. Really hit probably their most successful commercial peak in that period. Well, at one point or another, frustrated with lack of breaking big, they fired their lead singer, U.D.O. They then hired a new American singer, kind of did a little bit of a hair metal album, quickly abandoned that, went back to U.D.O. for a revival period of 3 albums before finally calling it quits with U.D.O. for good. Recently, they hired a new singer, and by recently it's now been probably over 10 years, but they hired Mark Tornillo, formerly of T.T. Quick, and have produced 6 albums. So calling him the new guy, probably not even apropos anymore. This has pretty much been the band for quite some time. Now, there are, in this case, 17 studio albums to go through. And I'm going to throw a curve in here because I'm going to rank the top 18. You're like, wait a minute, Metal Dude. How the heck are you going to rank 18 albums if they're only made 17 albums? Well, you're just going to have to stick around and find out. Throwing a little curve in here. If you've been watching the show for a while, you might know the 18th album that I'm going to include. But we have a lot to get to, so let's get started. All right, coming in at number 18 is the second studio album from Accept, I'm a Rebel. Quite frankly, there's not a lot on this album to talk about. I don't want to dwell on the albums I don't really care for. The biggest hit off this album is the title track, I'm a Rebel. But it's kind of, I don't know, a sophomoric song, kind of silly lyrics. Don't really care for it. Keep in mind, at this point, Accept hasn't really discovered who they are. In fact, I think they're trying to be kind of a cross between the Scorpions and AC/DC and doing neither one of those imitations justice. Accept's going to find their path couple of years down the road, but at this point they're still struggling with an identity. The other thing I don't like about this album is the production is not good. Interestingly enough, they had an intro album, they'd had their first album, and I thought the production on their first album was actually better than the second album, which is usually when you come from humble beginnings, your production gets better as you go. They kind of take a step back here production wise, and it feels a little muddy, a little blurry, not very clear. So I'm a Rebel. I gotta put this in the leave it category. Let's go on to number 17. Coming in at number 17 is the debut album, Accept. If you watched my discography special on Judas Priest a few weeks ago, This is kind of Accept's version of Rock-a-Rolla. For a rock album, I suppose it's pretty good, but this is not what Accept is going to be. I like the heavy metal version of Accept. This is kind of like a 70s rock Accept. It's okay for what it is, but it's not anything, again, that when I'm in the mood to listen to Accept, this is not something I'm going to reach for. A couple of pretty good songs. One, kind of their hit, if you will, off this album, Lady Lou, pretty good. Also, if you're looking for a deep track on this album, I really like Sounds of War. A couple of tracks to check out. But again, sorry, gonna have to put this in the Leave It category. These first two albums for Accept, I think, are by far the weakest in their collection. And again, it's just simply because they haven't really discovered, number one, who they are. They haven't really embraced that metal side of them yet. And because they have probably a little bit of trouble with the English language, their songwriting is not very good at this point. It's not very mature. In fact, a lot of the music that they're playing right now, they're buying songs. Some of these were rejected AC/DC songs, from what I understand. So they haven't really established their sound, both in the metal side of things, but also from a songwriting perspective. They're going to fix that in a couple albums. But for right now, pretty raw and not really what you would want from Accept. So again, number 17, the debut album from Accept, simply titled Accept. For number 16, we're going to jump all the way into the future, into the Mark Tornillo era, and the album The Rise of Chaos. I generally like the Mark Tornillo era of Accept, but this is one of those albums that just misses me completely. I guess the biggest hit off this album is a song by the name of Kool-Aid, which is in reference, of course, to the Jamestown Massacre back in the late 70s, where cult leader put cyanide in the punch and killed off many, many believers. Really a horrific thing. I don't know. I just think if you're going to write a song about something that tragic and that dark, it shouldn't be so tongue-in-cheek. Seems like they took a kind of a cheesy approach to that. Didn't really care for it. But it is the biggest hit off there. So if you want to give this album a try, that may be where you start. As far as the deep track goes, I kind of like Worlds Colliding. It's kind of farther back in the album. It's not too bad. But like I said, overall, this is an album that I was highly anticipating. I had loved the stuff in the Mark Tornillo era. This came out, premiere, here we go, and was very, very disappointed in this album. So coming in at number 16, once again, Rise of Chaos. Coming in at number 15, we're going to go with Eat the Heat. Now, as I mentioned in the opening, when we talked about the history of Accept, they had just fired U.D.O. Dirkschneider. There is a effort to become a little bit more commercial. So they go out and get American singer David Reese. The album isn't bad for what it is, but it is not a heavy metal album, in my opinion. It's more of a cross between kind of a bluesy rock and a hair metal kind of thing. It's kind of a cross between maybe Cinderella and Great White with like a pinch of Britney Fox. It's kind of in that realm. If you like that style of music, it's actually done pretty well. I think the production on here is halfway decent. David Reese is an amazing singer. I really like his voice. It's just not Accept for me. And I think the fans agreed with me on this one, because after they put out this album, it was a bit of a disaster. They broke up this version of the band after just one album. Having said all that, a couple of songs on here that you may want to give a try. XTC is a play on ecstasy, of course. It's the opening track. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good little rocker. but my favorite track on this album by far is D Train. I think it's got a really good vibe to it. Again, I don't think this is Accept in any way, shape, or form. Again, I think it sounds more like Cinderella, and that's not a diss. I happen to love Cinderella, but I want my Accept to be a little heavier, a little dirtier. Not this. So, once again, unfortunately, I'm going to have to put Eat the Heat in the Leave It category. Let's move on to number 14. Coming in at number 14, Predator. This would be the last album that Accept would do with U.D.O. Dirkschneider. So U.D.O. was in the band, he got fired, then they kind of did a reunion for 2 or 3 albums. And after this one, they finally just gave it up for good. This is a band at this point that's struggling. Keep in mind, 2 things are happening. Number one, they've had their issues back and forth between U.D.O. and the band. The chemistry isn't quite right. And number 2, this is an era where heavy metal was really struggling to get that commercial hold. So as Accept's trying to bring back the magic that they had in the 80s, the market wasn't really receptive to it, and the band themselves were kind of looking for any sort of spark. And so in Predator, one of the interesting things is they make an interesting decision. Hey, why don't we have the bassist sing along with the singer? So Peter Baltes sings on like 4 or 5 songs on this album. He does a duet with U.D.O. called Crossroads, which is, I think, the best song on there. But he has a couple of other songs. Lay It Down, It Ain't Over Yet, are a couple of songs that are really good. They have a real fast banger that U.D.O. sings later in the album called Crucified. But overall, I'm not sure why we're having Peter Baltes sing. I don't know why we're moving from U.D.O. It seems like they're at that stage of desperation where they're just trying to find any spark, any sort of way to get the band over. And it just looks like desperation flailing at this point. Predator, it's kind of all over the place. And I think it's really hard. It's not a cohesive album. And so that's why it's ranked here. I know you're probably starting to think, does this guy like anything from Accept? Well, we still have a ways to go, but this is definitely in the Leave It category. Coming in at number 13, Objection Overruled. Sometimes you're in a relationship with someone, it goes south, you get into a relationship with someone else, you realize that's an even worse disaster, and all of a sudden your ex doesn't look so bad. And so you make the decision to try to make it work again. But the chemistry is never quite there. That kind of describes the second run that U.D.O. had with Accept. It just never seemed to click the way it did the first time around. And their first album with U.D.O. back in the fold, Objection Overruled, is a textbook of that. The opening track, the title track, Objection Overruled, one of the best songs Accept ever has put out. It is an absolute classic. If you've never listened to this album, I highly recommend. If nothing else, you need to go hear that song. That's how the album starts. The album ends with a song called This One's For You, another really good song. Great start, great finish. But there's not much going on in the middle. There's a couple of pretty good deep tracks here and there. But for the most part, the chemistry just isn't right. So, Objection Overruled. The song itself goes into the Love It category. But this album, unfortunately, remains in the Leave It category. Let's go on to number 12. Number 12 might be my first controversial pick. So far, we've been hitting on some of the albums that are generally considered to be among the weakest of the Accept albums. But coming in at number 12 is an album that I've heard a lot of people sing to the stars as one of the best Accept albums. I just don't get it. Number 12, Russian Roulette. This would be the last of the albums they would do with U.D.O in his first run. And this was coming off really that peak commercial period of Accept. Russian Roulette's a very odd album. Much like the album we just got through discussing, Objection Overruled, this album has an incredible title track, Russian Roulette. I love this song. It is really kind of U.D.O's specialty, if you will. Really intense, really angry, great song. But the rest of this album just isn't that memorable. The first track, TV War, is pretty good. But the rest of this album, like I say, it's a heavy album. It is a darker album. I think one of the things that Accept may have been doing is the previous album was the album Metal Heart, which got a little bit of criticism, I believe, because I think people believed that it was a little bit too commercially. So I think Accept kind of overcorrects here and goes really heavy, really dark, but kind of leaves the melodies and the tunes are not very good. And I think it's ultimately why this was the last album in the original U.D.O run, because I think the band could see that they were losing ground in the market, not gaining it at this point. Again, a lot of people love this album. I bought this album at the time, again, with great anticipation, was really into Accept. It's just one of those albums that, other than the title track, I don't really play much. You can give it a try. You may like it more than I do, but I am unfortunately going to also put this one in the Leave It category. But good news. I think we're finally through with the Leave It category. We're going to move into the Like It category next. All right, no more Mr. Sourpuss. We're going to actually get into some Accept albums that I like. Coming in at number 11 is the brand new album from Accept, Humanoid. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of great detail on this album. If you want to hear my in-depth review of this, I have a link circling above my head at the moment that talks about the new album in depth. I will say this, it's got some great tracks. Frankenstein, The Reckoning, Unbreakable, and Mind Games are all really good modern day Accept tunes. I like this album. I am amazed at a band, again, that's been around for now into their, fifth decade, is still putting out such great music. I really like Humanoid. Go check it out. It comes in on our list, number 11. But now we get into the top 10. All right, coming in at number 10. The second album in the Mark Torello era, Stalingrad. This is a very solid album. I like it a great deal. I don't think it has the really high-end hits on here, but it has a lot of very good bangers, including, and I sense a pattern here, the title track, Stalingrad. It seems like every album, my favorite song on the album is the title track, and this follows that pattern. But there's also some other great songs. Flash to Bang Time, really heavy, really shows Mark Torello's pipes off in that song. One of the deep tracks I like on here is The Quick and the Dead. Go check that song out. It is fantastic. And the closing track is called The Galley. I'm just hitting the highlights. This is a solid album from start to finish. It is, I think, the heaviest and most serious album in the Mark Torello era. I like it a lot. I'm a little surprised that it came out as low as it did at number 10. But the rest of these albums are also very, very good. Kind of hard to move up the ranks. So I will put this firmly in the I like it category. Let's move on to number 9. Now, I just got through trashing Objection Overruled. and Predator, the comeback albums in the second run of U.D.O. Dirkschneider. But there is a pleasant surprise to be had in here. The most underrated album in the entire Accept library, I believe, is Death Row. Whatever magic Accept had left, they squeezed it into this album. It is actually a very good album. Most people, I think, kind of started to give up on Accept during this stage, and I'm not sure people have ever really given Death Row a chance. I know that during that period, most of the critics were really down on Accept, but go check this album out. It's very good. For once, I'm not going to brag up the title track on here. I'm going to talk about a really good track called Sodom and Gomorrah, a song called The Beast Inside. Ooh, like a loaded gun. Very good. And the song Prejudice. And those are just highlights. This is really, again, from start to finish, a pretty solid album from the boys at Accept. And I think it's the last great album that they did with U.D.O. Dirkschneider. So again, coming in at number 9, the tremendously underrated Death Row. All right, coming in at number 8, Too Mean to Die. Now this has nothing to do with the music, but I have to say, I love the cover art on this album. The cobra with the lightning tongue, very cool. Accept has really had a lot of very interesting album covers over the years. This one may be my favorite. We talk a lot about how much I love title tracks. This album's no exception. The song Too Mean to Die, one of the heavier songs on the album, really dig it. But my favorite song, and a song that at the very least is one of my favorite Mark Tornillo era songs, but maybe one of the top 10 Accept songs of all time, comes off this album, The Undertaker. If you want to check this out, that's where I would point you to start. The Undertaker is very good, very catchy, but has a little bit of a twist to it. I really like that song. There's another song on here that I really like that's a little slower, more of a ballad. The Best Is Yet to Come. We haven't talked a lot about ballads with Accept. Accept is one of those bands that doesn't do a lot of ballads, but their ballads are generally very good. And this is an example of one of their best ones. There's another song on here called Symphony of Pain. And in this song, we all know that Wolf Hoffman is influenced by classical music. And so one of the things he does from time to time that I just love to death is he'll take a metal song and he'll interject bits of classical music into the song. And he does that here. Really fantastic song. And I really like the sass of Not My Problem. Overall, this is a really great album. And as we reach the top 8 of Accept, we are now in the I Love It category. Everything from here on out are albums I absolutely love by Accept. Let's start talking about all of these great albums, because these are the albums, when you go to explore the Accept catalog, you need to focus in on. All right, coming in at number 7, we're going to get nostalgic, because this is the album that started me falling in love with the band Accept. The album is Breaker. Now, Breaker is finally, this is their 3rd studio album. We talked earlier in the program about how in their first 2 albums, they were still trying to find out who they were. Here, we start to see them find their identity, find their sound. You start to see the heaviness. You start to see U.D.O.'s personality in the songwriting coming out, the anger and the intensity that he has. Now, the lyrics are still a little bit wonky because, again, keep in mind, English is not their first language. They're going to solve their songwriting issues, an album down the road. But here, U.D.O. and the boys are still putting together lyrics that are a little bit off kilter. So one of my favorite songs of all time, a top 10 Accept song for sure, is again the title track, Breaker, with the infamous lyrics, "Icicle brains, bicycle chains." Terrible lyrics, and I don't care. This song encapsulates the attitude and the new metal beginnings that made Accept special. They're right in the middle of this album. There's 3 really great songs. Breaker is one of those. Right after that, they have the song "Son of a Bitch," and again, it's hilarious because one of the things I just love about U.D.O is he's pissed off and he wants everybody to know about it. And then they kind of do like a little bit of a live song right in the middle of this album called "Burning." This is really when they start finding the magic. I love this album. It's always going to be one of my favorites. Coming in at number 7, Breaker. All right, coming in at number 6, Metal Heart. This is probably the last of the commercially successful Accept albums. They were kind of on a roll at this point. It had, they had been building up to their big hit album, Balls to the Wall. They came back with this album, Metal Heart. They were producing videos for this. It seemed like they were on the verge of breaking through. Now, there are some people, like I said earlier, that criticize this album as being a little bit too commercial. I don't see it. I think it's got great melodies. There are so many good songs on this album. I'm gonna talk about, of course, the title track, "Metal Heart," is very good. "Midnight Mover" was one of the first singles that they produced on this album. They put a really cool video together for this song. If you want to see, a lot of times, let's be honest, music videos are a little bit, close your eyes and hope for the best. This was actually a really good metal video back in the 80s, which was a bit of a rarity. Really like this as a video. But there's so many good songs on there, so I'm going to read some of these tracks off here because "Up to the Limit," a very good song. A deep cut that I really like, "Wrong is Right," really good banger. "Too High to Get It Right," love that song. Very catchy song. And then a couple of deep tracks late in the album, "Dogs on Leads" and "Teach Us to Survive." This album is very, very good. And again, it's really taking Accept and it's smoothing out the edges. And it's a lot more consistent than some of their early work where they were kind of struggling with their songwriting. This is where they've really kind of hit their stride. I could probably bump this up, but boy, the top 5 are so good. It's got to stay here at number 6, Metal Heart. Check it out. Now I know you've been sitting here wondering, why are we doing a 17 album countdown with 18 albums? What is the metal dude on about tonight? Well, the answer is finally going to be here, because we are now in the top 5 Accept albums of all time. And while we are clearly in the love it category, these 5 albums are amongst the best heavy metal albums, my favorite albums of all time. I cannot tell you how much I like these 5 albums. I talk about this all the time. There is a Hall of Fame level to Accept, and it starts right here. While they had some clunkers, and we talked about how they had some difficulties and had some eras with the band that weren't great, these are Hall of Famers. And I'm going to start off with an U.D.O album. I know this is where it gets a little squirrely, but coming in at number 5 is U.D.O with the song "Animal House." You're like, wait, whoa. This is a countdown for Accept albums. Well, hold on, let me explain. I want to include this album because this is one of the most unique stories and one of the biggest blunders this side of Spinal Tap that's ever been perpetrated by a heavy metal band. Check this one out. So, Accept goes into the studio. They made Russian Roulette. We talked about it. A little bit of a disappointing commercial album. And they start to put together this album. And all of a sudden, they just get frustrated and throw in the towel. They fire Udo Dirkschneider, and say, here, the album that we were going to make, you can just have. Here's your consolation prize. You're fired, but you can have the album. Now, Accept goes on to do Eat the Heat, which was way up, whatever, number 16 or whatever that was, way up in the countdown. It was an absolute bomb. Just fell flat. But U.D.O takes this album that Accept was going to do and produces it with his own band. And so this album, while it is under the U.D.O banner, was completely written by Accept. And let me tell you something. Animal House, I like to throw it in here. I like to talk about this album because this is a late 80s album that's been kind of probably buried in the sands of time. This is a Hall of Fame level album. This is an album that you really need to go and pursue. Because if you've listened to the U.D.O band, this is completely kind of different from that because everything else U.D.O writes. And you can tell a difference between Animal House and this. Let's just get right to it. The title track, Animal House, fantastic. I'm going to go through Go Back to Hell, really fantastic song. Black Widow. And let me just say, you would not think U.D.O would be a great singer for a ballad. But one of my all-time favorite ballads is right here, In the Darkness. The depth of U.D.O.'s voice is sometimes underrated. He really brings passion into this song. This is my idea of what a great heavy metal ballad looks like. Check, if you don't do anything else, check out In the Darkness. We Want It Loud, a good anthem, a good heavy metal anthem. And finally, Warrior. I will stand this ground. If Accept had just stayed the course and put out this monster of an album, they might have had a completely different career, because I think this one is so good. I think it would have brought them back into the peak era of Accept. But oh, what a historic blunder. But again, right here, we're going to put it in the list at number 5. Number 4 might surprise a few people, because this is by many considered their greatest album. Coming in at number 4, Balls to the Wall. And listen, this is an iconic album. This is really the album that broke Accept into the mainstream. Balls to the Wall was really the first time they'd ever really broken into the radio play. They got their first video on MTV. This is where it all begins. Really big hit for them. And I love this album. Again, one of the best albums of all time. But there's actually 3 more that I like better. Anyway, London Leather Boys, an interesting song, right? I love the guitars in a song called Fight It Back. Check that one out. But ironically enough, or interestingly enough, there's a deep cut on this album that is my absolute favorite on the album. Turn Me On. Again, I don't think by the classical singing scale, U.D.O would be thought of as a great singer. But I love the way he sings this song. It kind of reminds me a little bit. It's a erotic song, right? About, but it's a menacing song. It's kind of like their version of This Love. Of course, this was long before that song, where it's both erotic but horrifying and menacing at the same point. Really intense and dark, this song, and I love it to death. Balls to the Wall comes in at number 4. We're about to talk about the big 3. Coming in at number 3 is the 3rd album in the Mark Tornillo era, Blind Rage. I love this album. I can't believe there's 2 better than this. I would say of all the Accept albums, this might be the highest energy album. If you really like a fast-paced, get it going, this may be your cup of tea right here. It starts off with a banger, Stampede. I think Stampede is right up there amongst the best opening tracks on any Accept album. Love Stampede. Dying Breed is a really interesting song. It really a tribute to a lot of the bands that had come before them, their heroes. I do like it when metal acknowledges all the eras of that music and the forefathers that brought all of this wonderful music to us. So I really like Dying Breed. Dark Side of My Heart, I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a ballad, but it is definitely on the lighter side. And again, Accept does those songs very well. Fall of the Empire, we'll talk about this a little bit, but it seems like Accept always has some sort of apocalyptic song in there. Fall of the Empire is a good one. And Final Journey, uh, again, we talked about this a couple of albums ago where Wolf Hoffman interweaves some really cool classical music into a great metal song. He does that here. And I can go on and on. This album is chock full of great hits. Uh, go check this one out. Blind Rage, one of the all-time greats. In the late 90s, it appeared that Accept hung up their guitars. For 14 long years, there was no music that came from Accept. So there was kind of a blend of excitement and skepticism when I heard that they were forming again after all these many years with a new lead singer, Mark Tornello. But boy, am I glad I gave them another try, because their first album back, their comeback, their debut with Mark, was an album called Blood of the Nations. Blood of the Nations is one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. I've never really seen a band come out of nowhere, again, out of the music industry for over a decade, and then come out with something this is an absolute scorcher. It starts off with a song called Beat the Bastards. One of the things I will brag about is I have a pretty good fantasy football team. I use this as my theme song because it's really about kicking ass and taking names. I love this song. The Teutonic Terrors follows that in a very similar type of song. We talked about the apocalyptic songs. The Abyss may be the best of the bunch. That's on this album. Let's see. Here's a tip, and this is very important. If you go and search out this album to listen to it, make sure you get the international version of it, because it has a song on there called Time Machine. And it may be my favorite song on the entire album. I don't know why they wouldn't have released this song in the States, but if you listen to it, you need to hear Time Machine. It is absolutely phenomenal song. And if that's not my favorite song, this one may be. In fact, this may be my favorite Mark Tornello era song right here. Pandemic. Ooh, this baby cooks. I love this song, Pandemic. Again, if you're going to listen to one song on here, you say, hey, you get one shot at it, try Pandemic. Really good. And just another song that I personally love, No Shelter. Really talks about sticking it to the corrupt people that run this country and this world. Really, if there's a song that you want to just read through the lyrics and get a good chuckle out of, I think this is it. Really good political commentary. This is not just a great Accept album. Again, this is one of the greatest heavy metal albums that's ever been written. And it's just amazing to me to this day that just after being away from the metal scene for so many years, that they just came back. And they have lots of material. We talk about a lot of these albums being, 10, 11 songs, 13 tracks, and all of them are excellent. This is a perfect album. Starts out great, maintains the greatness throughout. If you lost track of Accept, or you said, you know what, I'm not interested in an Accept without U.D.O. Dirkschneider, repent. Go listen to this. You'll love it. But it is not their greatest album. Anybody who knows me could have guessed this probably number one album when we started this exercise. Restless and Wild has to be the number one album in the history of Accept. And again, this is one of the greatest albums in heavy metal history. First and foremost, it starts off with Fast as a Shark. This is credited as maybe the first speed metal song. This song, I don't care what era of metal you come into, you hear this song, you'll say, that is a great metal song. It starts off with kind of a little bit of a German polka, and then the needle scratch, and then U.D.O screaming his head off. This song will melt your brain. I love this song. The title track is also very good. One of my all-time favorite Accept songs right there. Shake Your Heads. That opening guitar riff, so infectious. Love this song. One of the things we've talked about, and I don't know if you can call this, in fact, I know you can't call it a ballad, but U.D.O sings it like a ballad. It's so intense, and I love the way he sings Neon Nights. It's got that cool bass intro, and U.D.O's singing on it is just very similar to the song that we talked about from Balls to the Wall, Turn Me On. This has that kind of, U.D.O can sing things in kind of a haunting, menacing way, and really hit some really cool notes. Check out his singing on this one. Love Neon Nights. Demon Night is good. Flash Rocking Man. Talk about that one in a second. And really, one of their biggest hits of all time, Princess of the Dawn. If you go see Accept, they're going to play this in concert. One of their biggest hits of all time. So what happened? Interestingly enough, the guitarist decided that maybe they were having a little bit of trouble writing some of this music. So he incorporated his girlfriend into writing the songs, and they wrote the music and kind of made a combination here. So all of a sudden you start seeing, although Flash Rocking Man's a little bit of a callback to their songwriting. What is a Flash Rocking Man? It's one of those strange lyric songs, but you start seeing, again, better songwriting, and it just all starts to come together. This is a heavy album. This is a catchy album. This is absolutely their absolute best. Coming again at number one, Restless and Wild. If for whatever reason, I think we're talking like 1981, 1982 when this bad boy came out. If you have not listened to this album, if you've never heard Fast as a Shark, you're going to thank me. You're going to come back into this and you're going to say, thank you, Metal Dude. That is one of the greatest heavy metal songs of all time. One of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. I cannot stop gushing about this album and that song in particular, but the whole album, just fantastic. So go check it out. Do yourself a favor. Now, that's it for this episode. But if you like this kind of content, give this channel a thumbs up. We are approaching our first year anniversary. I've been thinking about maybe doing some specials around that. We started this channel last July. Here we are coming into June. So we're getting pretty close to have been doing this a year. And just coming to you every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So, I'm coming up on a year. Give me a little anniversary present. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. And you'll be alerted to all of our great content. We're going to be putting out more discographies. We're going to go back to our Grammy series where we go in year by year and talk about different bands that should have been recognized as the greatest from that given year. I think you'll really enjoy the stuff that we're doing. So be part of the family. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.